Cher Vinciane, that was fantastic. Thank you so much for being with us and becoming with us. Now, can you put the slide, please, to put an image? Okay. So Vinciane speaks with no PowerPoint, and I will put some images. I would like to give you these documents, distribute, maybe you could have one in 3 or 4. The original plan of today was to each of us do a part of our presentation in the morning and a part of our presentation in the afternoon, after the hypnotic induction that Marcos Lutyens will do to all of us, all of you and us. And so I hope that that will happen in part. I think Vinciane gave us her entire lecture, so there will be another part of your talk in the afternoon which will be something more improvised, I guess. Or is it really only half that you did? Oh, you did half. Oh, okay, then everything is on track. That was half of the lecture. So, yeah. So the paper, what I wanted to do, because I am here at Rietveld, and because the documenta was somehow evoked in various ways in this Where Are We Going, Walt Whitman project, was to take the opportunity to answer T.J. Demos, who gave a lecture here and who also is a very, very intelligent writer and critic, and who wrote the most ferocious criticism of documenta in the Brooklyn Rail, which is online. So I printed it out and read it and wrote all my little comments on where I disagree with him. But I wanted to take him seriously, and so at least for the record, because this will be online, in the morning do the ugly part, which is to answer T.J. Demos. And then in the afternoon, just pretend that didn't exist and talk to you about worlding, which is a word that I love and share, and that has something to do with it matters which stories we tell so that other stories can be told. And that is a matter of worlding, and that is a matter of this afternoon after the induction. So now is the very painful part, you know, the little angry documenta director answering the art critic who criticized the documenta. So, for the documenta, I wrote with great, great pain, because I'm not a philosopher and I'm not necessarily a writer, or not only. I wrote with great pain and over many months, through many conversations with many of the people that are part of the ship that we brought here today, sailing along the lines of some thoughts that may be traveling, and after which some notes may be undergoing some shallow to deep transformations. I wrote, it took about 3 months, the following 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 lines. I wrote, Documenta 13 is dedicated to artistic research and forms of imagination that explore commitment, matter, things, embodiment, and active living in connection with, yet not subordinated to, theory and epistemological enclosures. These are terrains where politics are inseparable from a sensual, energetic, and worldly alliance between current undertakings in various scientific and artistic fields and other knowledges, both ancient and contemporary. Documenta 13 is driven by a holistic and non-logocentric vision that is shared with and that recognizes the knowledges of animate and inanimate makers of the world, including people. Okay, so that's about saying that it's about everything, but it's about everything from a very precise affective engagement with everything. So, T.J. Demos, do I have his talk here? How many of you were here and attended his lecture? Really, not so many. Not so many. Really, how interesting. I thought I would get a forest of hands. Anyway, you have his text here. So T.J. Demos' article in the Brooklyn Rail and his lecture here some weeks ago on February 13th offer a reading of the Documenta 13, or rather, I believe, an affective reaction and interpretation of it. On the one hand, he recognized that the so-called ecological and the environmental crisis did indeed inform the project, which reflects a true urgency of our times. He also recognized this as being an editor of the third text issue about the relations between art and political ecology. But there is also a form of irritation that emerges from both the text and the lecture. An irritation to what appeared to him as a voluntary lack of concept on our part. A form of confusion. It's an interesting word, confusione, to bring together with. So a form of confusion and opportunistic pluralism that was best illustrated, according to him, by the impossibility, which I dared to do, of bringing both Vandana Shiva's activist outlook and Donna Haraway's cyborg vision onto the same terrain of Documenta. How utterly outrageous. I believe, therefore, that it is a good opportunity now to reply about this. In the article, he criticizes incoherence, and he seems to seek conceptual coherence and a more direct political artistic action than what he found in Kassel in Documenta. But this search for coherence is perhaps part of the problem itself that we would like to address in our practices. Incoherence is not necessarily a form of cynical postmodernist relativism. It can also, and more simply, be the wish to see the world from different perspectives and points of view, and to do that together through the agencement, again the Deleuzian word, the linking of crafts. That's why there's hands there crafting earth, uncooked earth, knowledges and collaborations. And it is based on the fact that I believe it is unethical and politically counterproductive to collate together in an exhibition of 100 artworks that are individually and singularly politically committed to issues of urgency around the world and of the world, without at the same time embracing the politics on the level of the people, the procedures, the protocols, the formats, the time of exhibiting, the time of viewing, the electricity you use to power the projector, the context and the place itself where the exhibition is situated. So it's about situated narratives and situated politics. The 100 Notes and 100 Thoughts collection of notes, essays, notebooks, drawings, notations, and propositions, also like the notes you find on my notes on this text, which I hope somebody will steal and scan and upload. Thank you very much. Are not bound by a discursive logic leading from one to the next, from number 1 to number 2 to number 3 to number 4 to number 100, until a final conclusion is reached, which is already preordained and clear in the mind of the mastermind of the organizer. Rather, they were fragments and different perspectives that all, however, shared something very important and yet invisible. The sense of commitment, of urgency, of meaningfulness, both personal and political, to the joy and well-being of the world. In Documenta 13, there was indeed no formalized curatorial concept, nor declared summary of interpretation of the world and its problems. But instead, there was an intent and a sense of there being meaning, a sense suspended on the border of the sensually embodied and the sense meaning making, a sense of the possibility of not reconstituting a subject, the subject of the exhibition, or the subject who utters, who speaks with authority about the exhibition with his or her curatorial concept, because it was not a book, an essay, nor a lecture. It was and is an aggregation of works, and it is the making of works together. More than, therefore, an archive of discrete works, it was a compost situation. What they have in common, an archive and a compost, is that we are taking things that we define dead, useless. Documents that are of no use are archived. The archive collects the dead documents and items that might be useful in the future for some historians, but they are placed in separate boxes or folders, so that there is no contamination between them, and we leave a pure situation of the past to the future constructing the past, and therefore the present and the structures of power of the present. A compost, on the other, is based on a molecular aggregation of inert objects, or apparently inert objects, partly carbon-based, like leaves and trees, and partly producing nitrogen, or organic waste. Mostly it needs to be ventilated, it needs to be oxygenated. And by there not being any folders, by there not being any boxes, the materials decompose, and through the decomposition, they recompose molecularly through symbiotic processes into soil, into rich soil. And there are many, many little animals and worms eating and digesting in that process. Also, I said it, but I wrote it also. There are a variety of creatures, worms, etc., that work on the materials, some in competition with each other, some in cooperation, some, as Andrew Yang wrote, feeding off the waste of others. The interactions are innumerable, and then actively, physically mixing and transforming into a newly usable form, ecologically looped, unquote. Cum ponere, to put together, to compost. Related to community, cum mitere, and also to cum mensa, to eat together, commensals, as Donna Haraway has said. Since the politics of each artist or art group's activities, this is the depressing lecture, the one about the critique of the critique. Since the politics of each artist or art group's activities were clear and strong in the documenta, I felt it was not only unnecessary but also counterproductive to attempt to describe the overall meaning and point of view of the artworks as if they had no voice of their own. And Vinciane Despret refers to something like this when she writes, in her lecture, which she just gave, so I quoted something that hadn't even been given yet, but she had sent it to me in advance. The sensual experience happens when living organisms touch each other, affect, and are being affected by one another. We recognize a sensual experience as the concrete experience in which each of the becoming actors effectuates in the others the power to be affected. A sensual experience is a flow of forces. These are the forces that attune, agence, instead of assemble, the agencement. And these are the forces that enact and articulate agency. And she continues a bit later, one may now be an agent without being a subject. And one is nevertheless not an object. T.J. Demos writes that I, quote, neglected to identify the crises and emergencies, unquote, related to ecological and environmental issues connected with the, quote, corporate financialization of nature, unquote. And that I aestheticized the question by reducing the political potential for action in the world through the presentation of, quote, biotic artworks, unquote. In the quote, already organically adorned Baroque park, unquote. And he even speaks of forms of an organic approach to, quote, sculptural decoration, unquote. The patriarchal critique of the decorative and of its related crafts is well known, as if decoration were, quote, women's work, unquote, and certainly not political. He refers as an example, this was our workshop on ceramics, and we were teaching each other ceramics and talking together in one moment of the documenta. You see Anna Bogigian, the Armenian Cairo-based artist in the back. You see Catherine Malabou and other people there. Kitty Scott, Pierre Huyghe and other people learning ceramics. He refers, however, immediately in his attack to the work of Christina Buch in particular, that her garden for butterflies made of plants that are appreciated by butterflies rather than by the human visitors to the documenta in the area. Trained also as a scientist as well as an artist, she studied which plants were the plants that would be loved and appreciated by the butterflies visiting the documenta in the area of Kassel, of course. He introduced it as a, quote, open-air butterfly micro-habitat, unquote. Words eeringly similar to the Konrad Lorenz scientific discursive words above, layered above a space of pleasure, unquote. In front of the Documenta Halle, and indeed it was not a hit with the press, and it was not particularly published because if you look at it, it doesn't have many aesthetic qualities according to humans. In front of the Documenta Halle, and she also, he also refers secondarily, the second piece he refers to is Christian Philipp Müller's Swiss chard ferry, of bringing together different varieties of Swiss chards, without mentioning that the piece is actually determined by Christian Philipp Müller's concern for the collapse of biodiversity and of the different species of chards in Europe, caused by the political decisions and the marketization of the distribution systems and the simplification of the distribution systems of foods that therefore is destroying the biodiversity of chards in Europe. But this was not mentioned in the article. And he also speaks about Song Dong's do-nothing garden in the Karlsruhe Park, made of plants growing on top of a mountain of rubble and organic refuse, indeed on top of a compost. He does not address nor discuss the radical political potential within forms of retreat, such as the do-nothing garden, exodus and withdrawal, as defined by the Italian autonomia thinkers and activists who address the contradictions of cognitive capitalism by rejecting all forms of productivity. Paolo Virno, Franco Bifo Berardi, Lazzarato, and so on. As in Song Dong's Do-Nothing Garden, one of the largest and least published artworks of the Documenta in the media, yet one of the most memorable for anyone who happened to spend time in Kassel, due to the fact that it was green on green background. It didn't look good in the art magazines, so it was not published. And due to the fact that it created an immense and intense aggregation of loafers. Since we are here in honor of Whitman, I remind you, I lean and loaf like a spear of grass, because every atom belonging to me as well belongs to you. It indeed had a huge olfactory aspect to the artwork, because there were not only weeds growing on it, as the article suggests, but there were also many broccoli planted by Song Dong, which in the summer months have a very strong smell. So the artist in that case was a little bit like an orchid, emitting a smell that attracted the loafers to this do-nothing garden. And that resisted the mediatization of it, and also in its temporary and ephemeral nature, although apparently monumental, it was, of course, destroyed at the end of the Documenta, and was an example of working on the procedures and protocol. Something that could be of an extraordinary expense was actually made through the collaboration of Documenta with the trash department of the city of Kassel. So therefore, costing a fraction of what building a hill and landscaping a garden like that would cost in a normal person's mind, who would go out and get trucks and trucks of dirt, buying it, purchasing it, purchasing the soil, as we buy slaves, for example. So it was also very based on a resistance to the commodification of a consumer good artwork. The Autolith group documentary film The Radiant, which you saw here yesterday, and I see Angelica and Kojo here, clearly embraces a strong anti-nuclear energy stand, of course, and was in the document and is mentioned as a kind of exception that proves the point. Some sort of weird thing that happened to land as an isolated entity in this documenta. So he appreciates that work as being in line with his criticism and politics. Happens to be also a work I love enormously. But that would be falling into incoherence, and therefore we move onwards. He did not, however, mention Mika Tanila's, or maybe he did, I can't remember, I don't think so, beautiful video film about the building of the nuclear energy plant in the north of Finland that is being currently built with the French, and which is a very clear also direct act on the part of Mika Tanila, who also is showing a different version of it in many documentary film festivals around as actually helping to stop the building of this nuclear plant. The catastrophe of the business of war, the nuclear question, the Japanese Fukushima crisis, disaster, catastrophe, was also the crux of the work of Shinro Otake, the only Japanese artist in the documenta, but was not mentioned at all in relation to this problem. The catastrophe of the business of war, that was a very important part of the documenta as well. The politics, the economy of war today. It was not an exhibition around purely environmental questions. Anyone who was there knows that there were many other things that were part of this compost and that needed to be part of the balance of nitrogen carbon-based elements, indeed, so that one could eschew any form of collapse into constituted conceptual arrangement of the documenta. The catastrophe of the business of war was clear in the works of artists such as, this was Shinro Otake's piece, I don't have the right images, it's very unprofessional, but it was clear in the works of artists like Mariam Ghani, Afghan artist who was speaking very clearly of the catastrophes undergone through the last 30 years and more, going backwards and backwards in Afghanistan, and in the works of Michael Rakovitz. The rejection of the corporate control of life forms was at the heart of Amar Kanwar's, this is Claire Pentecost, I've got the slides wrong, Jimmy Durham, Maria Teresa Alves. That's interesting. Well, anyway, this is the wrong picture for the text. But they were at the heart, but I'm going to show you Amar Kanwar this afternoon. It's in the other PowerPoint. So this rejection of the corporate control of life forms was at the heart of Amar Kanwar's work for the documenta about the reduction and social catastrophe with increased suicides of farmers in the Orissa region in India due to the reduction of the biodiversity of rice. With GMOs being distributed to most post-colonial countries and many first world places as well. Not everywhere. One of the only good things about Italy is that they tore down the corn, the maize that was being planted with GMO seeds some years ago. The farmers thought, well, if we can build illegally little houses and then they get always accepted by the Italian government in the second stage through paying taxes, we can plant GMO corn and then it will get accepted. We'll just have to pay a tax. But the region of Piemonte sent tractors and the fields, and no one ever tried again. So one good thing about Italy, one few things, is slow food that was invented in Italy. Of Italy today, I don't mean, of course, Pasolini and so on. Also was the topic of Claire Pentecost's work, She collaborated with Witzenhausen University, it's called bioagriculture. As Donna Haraway suggests, we could remove the prefix bio and put the prefix terra, and it would liberate us from a lot of sadness through etymological becoming with. Claire Pentecost did composting and created earth, which became the material for a new currency called the erg, which were these lingots of composted earth, amongst many other activities that she did, including participating in the ceramic workshop in many of the end activities that were organized by Rene Gabri and Ayreen Anastas here with us. So constant contaminations and not understanding where the limits are of what a person or another person or an entity or a material do, but doing it together nonetheless. As well as no mention of Jimmy Durham and Maria Teresa Alves' work, and highly political, nor Mark Dion's work, nor the denunciation of the increasing gap between wealth and poverty in the world that Critical Art Ensemble's helicopter project made. And this project was a project to cater to the narcissism of some of the visitors, because it was very expensive to buy the tickets to go up into the helicopter, and you would go up to the highest point of wealth of individual people. So it was like a histogram, and you could look down onto the earth very far below you, the way satellites do. And then he gave away a bunch of tickets for free as well. So it was again a project that self-funded itself, by the way, through the narcissism of the wealthy. Nor was there any mention of Time Bank's proposal for alternative currency. It was more a documentation of the projects that they've done around that, nor any reference at all, mysteriously, to N's activities that were based on exploring the possibilities of non-capitalist life in the micro-political level of the daily life in Kassel, the 100 days spent there, the commitment to the documenta by living there, and elsewhere. And the list could continue. This is one of the Blackboard days of N's trying to figure out where we were, who, why, and for whom, as the WHB would say. In his lecture and in his article, he categorizes the different approaches to the problem through which could emerge a political ecology into 4 categories. So I'm very glad that he was able to find that we can subdivide it into 4, precisely 4, not 3, not 5, not 10, 4. Number 1, Guattari, and his late 80s ideas of the 3 ecologies, that one must consider the subjective register, that is the space of psychology and desires, the social register, the social ecologies, and the environmental register, our environment. As much as I love and appreciate Guattari, which is true, it is a very ancient way of looking, because it turtles all the way down. There are no concentric circles here of the subject, the social, and the environment. That's part of the problem of human exceptionalism. That's part of the problem. So one can look at Guattari's notions, but one must look at them through understanding also the fact that there is no center, and that we make the world while making it, and that agency is made through the actions themselves between. So there is no singular psychology, social ecology, and environmental ecology, unless we wish to keep the hierarchies of power that characterized much of our history. The second was Latour, so he refers to Bruno Latour and the politics of nature, saying that it builds on Guattari. Many people are working on it today, de-anthropocentricizing, denaturalizing the world. It's a pity that he doesn't mention that Latour dedicates Pandora's Hope also to Donna Haraway. And it's a pity he doesn't mention that Michel Serres, quasi-object, is actually very important in the development of Latour ideas. It's a pity he doesn't mention Isabel Stengers. It's the pity he doesn't mention Lynn Margulis. It's a pity he doesn't mention Karen Barad. It's a pity that it all is reduced to the cliché of our times. No matter how much I appreciate, and I do, Latour's network actant theory and the incredible contributions that he is giving to rethinking science and to science studies. But it's still a pity, because neither the Guattari nor the Latour are particularly looking at all that universe of, as Derrida did not when he wrote L'animal que donc je suis, they are not looking at all those philosophers who are thinking together with the other beings. For example, the ethologists, Vinciane, I mean, Latour does as well, but not as much as maybe would be right to do, like going back to Uexdal or to Bennett and so on and so forth, and looking at the problems in Lawrence, but also the incredible potential that was in so many other thinkers from the late 1800s and 20th century. But they are not considered philosophy, so therefore you can prove your point by the fact that they are not considered philosophers, so they're not part of philosophy. And the problem occurs when I break with the trajectory of subjectivism in all of Western philosophy. Moi, Derrida, je parle. So, number 3, he quotes Marxist approaches and looking at environmental issues through the relationship or the analysis of geography under advanced capitalism, and what happens when nature itself becomes internalized in capitalist system, and so on. Then the 4th approach he looks at is the political ecology of activists coming from post-colonial third world so-called places such as Vandana Shiva, and the activist battles against corporations in the name of traditional farmers and so on. So, I don't, no, I'm fine, thank you. Am I 30 minutes up? But Vinciane used her, the 30 minutes are up? And Vinciane only spoke 30 minutes? I don't think it's fair. I think there's some cheating going on. Okay, but anyway, I'm going to then shorten this. Documenta 13 did not want to only represent or show the problems, describe the problems, provoke outrage, or provide information on the crises. We also wanted to propose ways to tell further stories, ways out of the crises. Possibilities of healing, both on the level of the ecology of the mind and of the body, what Sueli Rolnik would call body knowledge, or through art therapy experiments such as Paul Ryan's Thream in the Aue Park or Pedro Reyes' Sanatorium, which cannot be severed and cut from all the so-called bio artworks in the exhibition. And on the level, or I would like to mention Marcos Lutyens' Reflecting Room, that is a question of commitment, to spend 100 days hypnotizing as many people as possible as a form of therapy, art therapy or aesthetic therapy, is an amazing commitment on a small micro level. Possible ways or current ways of rethinking through, for example, the political potential in love as a political category were present in the work and in the writings of Etel Adnan, Judith Butler, Michael Hart, not mentioned in his criticism, and nor was there any mention of the potential in multi-species coevolution or the involutionary models of an affective ecology, a queer ecology shaped by pleasure, play, as in many plant-insect relations, which you just heard about, the ways in which plants and insects involves themselves in one another. I think basically he summarized what he saw as a problem in the contrast and impossibility of bringing together Donna Haraway and Vandana Shiva. Now there's a small detail. Vandana Shiva respects and admires Donna Haraway, and Donna Haraway respects and admires Vandana Shiva. So maybe we need to start thinking about that and start from there, as opposed to making a decision on the outside that these things are opportunistic relativism. He almost suggests that Haraway might be in favor of Monsanto GMO seeds. And I believe this is a complete misunderstanding of Haraway's position, even within her negotiation of the organic technological at the time of 1985 Cyborg Manifesto. She says, I am a creature of the mud, to stay in the gray zones. That is to stay in the area where the insect and the orchid are interacting. And Vandana Shiva has a website and does send emails. I also fear a form of essentialism even in believing that you are like idealizing this anti-technological activist farming activities, which I believe is a simplification completely of both sides. So in trying to figure this out, I'm sorry, but I'm going to finish because otherwise it doesn't mean anything. It becomes like television. Yeah, so when Vinciane Despret says a critique of biology, she is criticizing the particular biology that was the biology of modern science as it had developed up until a very important avenue of today, which is rethinking science studies through other means and reinventing biology, reinventing these. In the work you mentioned, Lynn Margulis, but of course also in the work of Donna Haraway, who is biologist as trained. And by the way, Vandana Shiva is a physicist by training in Canada. Haraway has been staunchly against the patenting of genetically engineered entities through an alliance between research institutes, universities, and the market. She's been one of the people who have noticed this capitalistic turn of the university often in the United States. A molecular biologist, she celebrates transformations and what she calls terra formations, the vibrant vitality and creativity of life forms merging and diverging symbiotically like a giant compost. It is in the making and coming together of bodies that Haraway looks, while it is at the bodies of local knowledges that Shiva looks to create her world. Bodies in both cases, Gaia in both cases, Terra in both cases. So to see these as incompatible is problematic because only accepting localism can turn into a conservative outlook very easily, while of what interestingly is called heritage and the so-called patrimoine, the patrimoine local. And patrimoine, of course, has pater, father, in the etymology of it. So there is a risk in that, while a view of constant change and merging by alone can also desituate practices, can desituate life, and is also very dangerous and can lead to adopting a Monsanto idea. It may even essentialize the two positions and even essentialize nature, the notion that nature-culture or human-non-human divide that feminist theory has so strongly contested. And by the way, this was very present in Arte Povera, one of the most important aspects of Arte Povera's thinking in the 60s, when Mario Merz put electricity through the bottle, and he is speaking about the fact that everything is natural or everything is cultural. It depends on if we believe, if we want to give agency to the bacteria or to our thoughts, or we want to take away the agency and be a more like, it all comes from something else, then there is only culture. So there is either only culture or there is only nature, or there are nature cultures, which is the term that Donna Haraway uses. So that has been a long trajectory. It's not only from Latour, it's been in art through those moments of the late 60s, and it was in actually De Rerum Natura, and it was actually in Heraclito for that matter, and in many other civilizations, in many foundational myths and indigenous philosophies from Australia to all over. So to see these, so we said that. So he seems to criticize Haraway. Another point is he seems to criticize Haraway's embracing of storytelling and SF speculative fabulation, science fiction, as if this were a form of escapism from the problems of the real world, while feminist science fiction has always been a major avenue of emancipation from the strictures of the rationalist and logocentric readings of life. Let us only think of the 18th and 19th century novels, of the Gothic novels written by women at the time of the Enlightenment, from Anne Radcliffe, The Mysteries of Udolpho, and so on, proposing an alter Enlightenment or alternative to the Enlightenment's rationalism, and up to today's fiction writers such as Octavia Butler or Ursula Le Guin and so on, or thinkers like Avery Gordon in her book Ghostly Matters. All sci-fi is not Avatar or Star Trek, as he says in his article, which are narratives that pursue the myths of progress and financial capitalism invested in the digital and the virtual. There is also, I remind TJ, Chris Marker's La Jetée, also a sci-fi movie. Furthermore, to reduce Shiva to a simple narrative of protection of indigenous agricultural rights and the natural farmers' seed banks seems almost to essentialize the post-colonial feminist who certainly uses email, the internet, I said that before, has a website and was trained in Canada as a quantum physicist, and certainly understands that it is naive to perpetrate an idea of the natural just as much as it is naive and dangerous to consider certain humans as primitive. There certainly was not a non-committed pluralism in Documenta, but instead a challenge to bring together the visions and different inflections of Shiva's practices and Haraway's practices, and I see much more that they share than that divides them. So let us go to that. Shiva is a woman of the global south, one of the founders of social ecology, an environmentalist, activist against neoliberal globalization, for farmers' rights and the right to food, the daily, access to water, forests, etc. Haraway is a cyborg, a creature of the mud, a molecular biologist, active in science studies, a researcher of Whitehead legacy, whose politics embrace inclusiveness and contradictions of the present. She is Californian, a visionary, committed to storytelling and figuration, lives near Silicon Valley, to science fiction as a sphere where contradictions are held together. They have two different views on technology, a threat for one, a possibility for the other in relation to survival, even though the analysis of technology is an analysis of bodies. But both are feminists, and both are committed to why matter matters and to the embodied. And they both see a continuity between the domination of the woman and the domination of nature through history. Shiva sees the relation between, for example, the invisibility of the woman's labor in agriculture in India and the invisibility of the bee's labor. She writes about that, labors. They position so-called nature as a political question within feminist discourse, and both criticize the patriarchal reason of modern science, from which they both come. Following on Caroline Marchand's notion of the death of nature, according to which nature as a living organism died when the Enlightenment transformed it into a passive machine. They both don't see any nature-culture divide, but an alliance between the two, and they both reflect on how to be in the world at the time of ecological crisis we are living. They both are against the corporate control of life and nature, but they develop two politics. Shiva, the notion of terra democracy, Haraway, the notion of companion species or messmates. Both have cosmopolitical voices, to use Isabel Stenger's terms. For both of them, the anthropocentric and the androcentric system, based on the notion and illusion of unlimited growth, is inadequate to confront the collapse of the social poverty and inequality today. The food and energy crisis caused by the financial system of transforming the commons into commodities, and the ecological crisis, climate change, and reduction of biodiversity. Fundamentally, they are both ecofeminists, committed to the flourishing of life on the planet, and doing so with the awareness of the history of feminism and of patriarchal modes of othering, and in resistance against Western rational thought. I wrote that already. I'm just repeating. It's like a thank you, thank you, thank you. Although the term ecofeminism was coined by Françoise de Bonne, connecting the exploitation and domination of women with that of the environment, both seen as traditionally subaltern to serve us, as in a lay development of modern science from the traditional monotheistic religions which were founded on human exceptionalism, that the nature is there to serve us, the very special humans for which the nature was created. We remove God, but we bring God into ourselves, and we become a continuation of that particular monotheistic religious tradition, even within a lay and non-religious modernity. So I found on the internet, while preparing this for you, I thought, am I the only crazy person in the world who would put Vandana Shiva and Haraway in the same project? And thanks to the Google, the horrendous Google, with all its terrible, there needs to be an ecology of Google and of search engines. There need to be alternative search engines made. There need to be different ways of finding things, and not finding certain things at the top and other things at the bottom. There need to be other Googles created. I found Claudia Bruno, buried under a lot. She's a student of Rosa Boraidotti, an Italian feminist thinker who also was very interested in Haraway and Shiva. And Claudia Bruno just finished her PhD thesis a little while ago. It's not published. And it is on the comparison of Donna Haraway and Vandana Shiva, 276 pages, which I asked her to send to me, to email, and it's in Italian, so very few of you can read it. But she wrote to me, something which I can't find. And that's it. No, I found it. She wrote to me, the term emergency assumes at once the meaning of a sudden difficulty and also a creative reaction to this difficulty. So I hope she publishes her thesis.